Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, it's Jessa back for another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. I am so glad you're here with me listening. I really appreciate the support of all of you who tune in and hopefully get something really useful from the broadcast. That is my goal. I really want to bring you, topics and information and insight that you can put into practice in your life. And, I know that not every week is going to be relevant to you. I'm covering such a broad range of topics, but I hope you find some gems. I really do. And I want to make sure you know that if you're part of my mailing list, which you can get to through bettersexpodcast.com, I'm offering free monthly webinars that are a Q&A. So I, might present some information or topic to start with, but then it's just a wide open Q&A. And while it isn't therapy, I've got to make that disclosure, you can pick my brain, you can get, some ideas, or, I can answer questions in somewhat of a generic fashion, but hopefully it would be really helpful. So I would love to have you join me for that. This week's episode is a new topic that I actually had not heard of until this person reached out to me about being on the show. She's coined this term, so it's not really a surprise, and her book is not out yet. So yet another reason I would never have heard of it, but it made sense. It resonates with what I know of the world and the kinds of things I see in my practice, so I was really intrigued. The term is Patriarchal Stress Disorder. And what she's talking about is that historically, patriarchy has been very damaging for women. It has been traumatic. It has been unsafe for women to be fully free, to be sexual, to be powerful, to be successful in a lot of ways. And even though we've made strides, I would say, in our culture, some of this persists, right? We're still living in a patriarchal culture that gives us, to some degree or another, some at least small t trauma in this lifetime. But what research is showing is that trauma is hereditary. Ancestral trauma is coded into our genetics at this point and has effects now in this life. So what she has become clear about is that ancestral patriarchal stress affects us now in ways that we maybe have never understood or seen, so that all of us have trauma that we've inherited. Now, this is true actually of men and women. It's not just women that suffer from this. There are other traumas that we've inherited besides those brought about by patriarchy. But anyway, that's the subject of the conversation today. Valerie Rein is my guest. Patriarchal stress disorder, how it shows up, and an overview of how we escape it, which she calls our jailbreak. It's a fascinating conversation, and I hope it is significant and helpful to you. I'm sure you're going to love it. Valerie, thank you so much for being with me.
Hi, it's a pleasure, Jessa. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. This is an intriguing topic to me. It's not a term I had ever heard before, and I'm so curious to learn more.
Great. So we'll have a juicy conversation.
Yeah. So you suggest that there's sort of a missing link to better sex. So could you expound on that a little bit?
Yes. I'll tell you the origin story of how I came to discover it maybe a little later if you're curious. So
sure,
without any context, I'm just going to say, could just come out and say, just come out and say that I've been a therapist for a long time, working with people coming to me with different problems, including, not having sex or not having great sex, different intimacy issues, and anxiety, depression, and addiction, and all that jazz. And what I started noticing was what was working when I was working with these people, and particularly women. Once we started working on some kind of trauma that was underlying this discomfort, things started to get better. But what was even more intriguing for me is that women who didn't have any trauma history at all responded to the same exact tools of working with trauma, mind, body, spirit tools. Yeah, that was very, very intriguing for me. So I started looking at what could it be? What could it be that is that trauma that we all share? And women have been oppressed for thousands of years. Oppressed, disempowered, basically owned. And there is now scientific evidence of genetic transmission of trauma.
I have heard about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that was really the key that unlocked this mystery for me and helped me find this missing link. Because once we consider that oppression is traumatic and that trauma is transmitted genetically, now we begin to understand that those issues we're dealing with, and we think, oh, it's just me, I'm having this problem. But we were actually born into this invisible inner prison of the trauma that's ancestral and also collective, and also we've added quite a bit in this lifetime of being a woman in the patriarchal society.
Right. So we have varying degrees, right, of trauma in our current lifetime around this, right? Some people way more than others.
Right.
And yet we're all going to have inherited what you're saying, way more than we've experienced right now.
Yeah. And way more than we consider. If we don't consider this frame, there's this saying, somebody wise once said, when we make the invisible visible, we make the impossible possible. And once that invisible became visible to me, and I started sharing it with my clients and students, and they started having massive breakthroughs, working on the trauma they didn't think they had, then everything started unfolding. Better sex is one pretty immediate outcome, and also better everything, better money inflow, career success or entrepreneurship, better relationships, that of course, hand in hand with better sex. And just being able to have this joy and juice of life flowing, because something that trauma creates in our system, it creates compartmentalization. There are some areas that don't feel safe, and we don't go there. And for women, historically, it's never been safe to be connected with pleasure or desire or power. And when we begin to really experientially deconstruct it, we discover that, pleasure and power run through the same channels for women. They're intertwined. Can't have power without pleasure, can't have pleasure without power. And they both feel very unsafe. Women have been historically punished for being powerful, varying degrees. And so we carry the imprints of this trauma. So that was my discovery of patriarchy stress disorder that my clients later dubbed the missing link to better sex, success, happiness, fulfillment.
Yeah, and I guess what you're saying is that the capital T trauma that clients have had in this lifetime, that is visible to all of us, right?
Yes.
But understanding that, wait, there's a level of trauma that all of us have that is blocking us, that we may not even realize it.
Yes, correct. And that was quite an aha moment for me in my own life, because my clients were having these massive breakthroughs. That was before the frame of patriarchy stress disorder came into my view. But I was working primarily on trauma resolution with everybody.
Yeah.
Because when we dig deep enough, we find this kind of trauma or that kind of trauma. And I have actually redefined trauma in my practice as anything, any experience or circumstance that makes it feel unsafe for us to be in the fullness of our authentic expression.
Yeah.
And we've all had a bunch of those.
Right.
And like you said, varying degrees. And it doesn't have to have been a life-threatening experience, being kidnapped, raped, held at a gunpoint. But that experience of being unsafe might have been created by criticism, by, somebody yelling at you growing up, et cetera, et cetera. the irony of this was that I didn't think that I had trauma.
Oh,
and so I was stuck in my own life. I was stuck, and I was suffering, and I was going to therapy and going nowhere. I was going to individual therapy, couples therapy, and it's nice to talk to somebody. Connect with another human being. It's really helpful in that regard, but it wasn't resolving my issues.
Mm-hmm. So that's what you discovered. I mean, that's when you thought, "Oh, light bulb! I have the same patriarchy stress disorder."
Yeah, it really came to the point of pretty acute suffering, and it came to the point of the end of my marriage, actually. And I had been in a marriage to a really, 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 really good person, really nice guy, and we were friends, and we were good partners in life in a lot of ways. And he was a wonderful dad, and it was very, very confusing because basically the moment we got married, we stopped having sex. Not entirely. We would have it, a handful of times a year.
Right.
And once I started coming out and talking about having had a sexless marriage after it ended, so many women started coming out of the crevices and raising their hand, me too, me too, me too. And it's so common and so heartbreaking. And for me, it was after my marriage ended that I considered, well, how come I stayed for 12 years? And we were going to therapy. But I stayed. I was so unhappy. But I was rationalizing that, but he's such a good person. And then I realized that it had been so unsafe for a woman to be in touch with her desires. And the society invalidates so deeply our every attempt to live from a place of happiness. It's seen as selfish. And I began to really recognize all those defenses as part of the trauma mechanism. And for me, coming out of this and now being in a relationship of beyond my wildest dreams, really, that path has been through mind, body, spirit, trauma resolution.
So how does this trauma show up for people? Like what's the sort of symptomology or the way people would recognize, oh, I have some of these blocks?
Well, just the way I see it, and this may resonate with some people will recognize it right away. Some people will say, no, not me. Because we all have inherited trauma adaptation mechanisms. All women. All women. Men have their own stuff. I'm talking about women right now. We all have inherited trauma adaptation mechanisms where it's never been safe to be visible as a woman. It's never been safe to be in our turn on. It's never been safe to be attractive. It's never been safe to be fully in our money power. It's never been safe to be in our zone of genius. Never been safe. And so we have those mechanisms that are holding us back from the true expression, fullest authentic expression of ourselves. And we all have that.
Right.
Without exceptions, but bigger or lesser degrees. And bigger or lesser degrees of awareness. I find that women become aware of those invisible walls that are holding them back when they start reaching for something more in their life.
Yeah.
This is not good enough for me. I want a better relationship. I want better sex. I want more money. I want to play full out with my talents in the world. And that's when we start running into those invisible electric fences.
Yeah. Like there's a barrier between here and there.
Yeah. And that's what you asked me about symptoms. We start noticing that, well, something is holding me back. And of course, because of our programming, something is wrong with us, which is a part of PSD.
Right.
And we're trying to fix ourselves. And what I'm saying is that there's nothing wrong with you. It's not an individual program. It's a part of a bigger thing. And yes, we can absolutely heal this ancestral trauma. And it starts with awareness and having these conversations.
All right. So this does raise the question. What do we do about it? Like how do we heal or release something that we can't see? You know, I'm hearing you say, okay, we can start to get an awareness of these sort of invisible walls or fences or barriers for ourselves, but they're still sort of like invisible, right?
Yeah. What we do notice when we start moving toward that more, toward the desire, we notice that something gets in the way, and that something may show up as thoughts, self-defeating thoughts, the inner critic. That's one symptom. And, the thoughts telling us you'll never succeed. Why try? Everything has been done before. It will never get better. Or you're too young, you're too old, you're too fat, you're too this, to
anything, right?
To anything, or not enough something. So that was because as a woman in the patriarchal society, we can never be correct, like under the rules of patriarchal. If we buy into the patriarchal game, which I call the prison game. So you asked me what we can do about this. This is how we start to recognize it, that we're moving towards something that we desire. Or even before that, when we start to inquire into what's my true authentic desire, what do I actually want? And that's when we start running into the walls. Like, I don't even know.
Yeah.
So many clients come to me I mostly find that women in midlife start having these questions because they're already successful. They've checked all the boxes that the society told them to check. Get your education, get into a partnership, mostly marriage, have kids, have a career, make your money. They've checked the boxes, and the cruel irony is that it didn't deliver on the promise of making them happy and fulfilled. So they come to me wondering, what the hell do I do now? Who am I? I don't even know my authentic self, my authentic desire. What do I want? I've spent my life catering to everybody else's wants and desires, what the society wants from me, my parents, my husband, my children. And that is the first point of inquiry, where we may notice that we're running into those invisible walls. Like, it's hard to get in touch with our desires. And over the time of working with people one-on-one for over 20,000 hours in my therapy practice, I've boiled it down to a 5-step system, the way to help women move from that initial point of, oh shit,
okay,
I don't like my life right now, and I think something's wrong with me.
Hi, it's Jessa here, taking just a quick break. Thanks for listening so far. I wanted to let you know about the sex quiz that I've put together called How Healthy Is Your Sex Life? I've taken a close look at the typical ways that I see couples get into trouble with sex, including avoidance, neglect, negativity, distraction, and boredom. And the free quiz will score your individual results based on these factors. And then I provide my recommendations and ideas, including my top 10 sex tips, which will help you make instant improvement. If you'd like to take the quiz and see how healthy your sex life is, you can do it right now at sexhealthquiz.com.
And so we start by the first step. I call it a jailbreak system.
Okay.
Patriarchal Stress Disorder as an invisible inner prison. We were born into it, and until we see it, we can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So the first step is waking up in prison. Just waking up, seeing the walls, and realizing it's not personal. There's nothing wrong with me. There is this traumatic setup that we've inherited from our mothers, grandmothers, etc., etc. The society reinforces, and we've had a bunch of experiences in this lifetime that have been, instrumental in holding us on the inside.
Right.
Yeah, so that alone is pretty liberating, because a woman gets out of the hamster wheel of constant self-improvement, and she realizes there's some healing to be done, not self-improvement necessarily. Step 2, she looks at, so that's where we meet we take a look at the prison security system. We meet what I call prison guards. All these symptoms, these expressions in the mind, the thoughts and beliefs in the body because our health and different symptoms on the physical level really show that we're imprisoned, because the moment we start moving towards something comes up on the physical. It can be low energy, it can be weight gain, it can be adrenal fatigue. Oh gosh, so many successful women are struggling with these symptoms, hormonal imbalances, because the body doesn't feel safe on this journey, but they are doing their best to still persevere.
Okay, so you're saying, so as we make some progress in our career or relationship or something else is going to fall back, until we've resolved this.
Exactly, Jess.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So until we resolve this, the prison security system will be firing up, whether in the mind or in the body, autoimmune, allergies, all sorts of things that are holding us back. And then in the domain of action, it can be addictive behaviors, distractions, or inaction, being in freeze, anything that holds us back. And for those listeners who deal in other dimensions, such as manifesting things, then there is the fourth one, from our subconscious beliefs of our unworthiness, basically, as a woman in the patriarchal society. We manifest all sorts of circumstances that are holding us back as well. So, fourth dimension optional. We have enough to do with the first three. And so in the third step of the jailbreak system, then we bribe and befriend the guards. We learn to work with the defenses, not to override them, with the understanding that they're here to keep us safe. And we learn mind, body, spirit practices that actually retrain the nervous system to not be firing up, to not be feeling unsafe. And we create this embodied safety that is enduring, regardless of the circumstances. And that enables us to turn our prison guards into our bodyguards. And they actually aid us in the rest of the jailbreak journey, which takes us to step 4, which I call digging the tunnel, where we dig into layers of trauma, both personal and historical, ancestral. All sorts of stuff comes up layer by layer. We don't do it all at once.
Okay.
Each layer reveals its own benefits and gives us more strength and safety to go deeper. And to go higher, we need to go deeper. And then we have our jailbreak moments at every level. And step 5 is really all about creating your conscious life, consciously creating your life on the outside. This is where we shift from unconsciously manifesting things to consciously creating our lives. And this is where it gets tricky, because there are no blueprints for this kind of life. It's not your mother's life. And there are very few women who are living this kind of life out there to model after. So that's why I'm very passionate about creating and growing community of jailbreakers. I'm working on my book now. It's coming out soon. I have a podcast, Her Success Radio, to keep educating women and giving them that thread, countercultural thread that spells out there's nothing wrong with you. Here is a healing path, and other women are on this path, and here is how we can connect with it and get support.
Can I ask a question or two about step 4, the digging into some of the trauma? Like that ancestral trauma too? Like, can you make that a little concrete for me, like an example? Like how does that step work?
Yeah. So, for example, I once had a young Jewish woman come into my office who has never had any trauma experience in her life. And she had incapacitating anxiety, extreme fear of unknown places and situations. And she was well educated. Her career was thriving. But each time she needed to get on a train, go to a job interview or a meeting, she would throw up. She would go into like a complete freeze, very intense. Looking at her life alone, that there was nothing to pin it down to.
Right. This would seem inexplicable.
Yeah. But her grandparents are Holocaust survivors.
Right.
And they've actually done studies involving Holocaust survivors, looking at consequent generations having raised cortisol levels as a baseline. So this hypervigilance as an adaptation has been passed down generation after generation, because safety first. That's how we survive as a species. We have survival of the anxious. And so outside of this extreme example of Holocaust survivors, we all have survived because our ancestors have been hypervigilant. And it's never been safe to be a woman in the world. And it's never been safe to be a powerful, visible woman in touch with her sexuality, in touch with, it just hasn't. So healing ancestral trauma actually involves the same process as, there are some additions to this. But the symptoms show up in the current lifetime.
Right.
We don't need to imagine anything. It's here. The anxiety is here. What's holding us back is here. And where it came from might have been ancestral, might have been cultural, or your own lifetime. It doesn't even always, need to be distinguished. We don't need to always know, but we work with the symptom.
Okay. Yeah. I think that was my question, because it's, not being a Holocaust survivor or something I can point to. It would be,
right.
I wouldn't be able to identify the kind of ancestral trauma that I personally would have inherited, right?
And we don't need to. Right?
Okay.
All we need to know is the truth of our experience in the moment. Are we living our fullest lives, or something is holding us back? And then understanding it's not our fault, and working with those things that come up.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let me ask you this. What about the men in our lives? I mean, we still live in a patriarchal society.
Yeah.
So in some ways, of course, there's still the privileged class of people that I would imagine to some, at least slight degree, perpetuate patriarchy. But, I'm imagining those of us who have very well-meaning supportive partners, what's their role in the system and in this healing?
Oh, thank you for asking this wonderful question, Jessa. My big passion is helping women heal so that we can help men and relationships heal, and ultimately the world. So we start by making it safe for a woman to be a leader in taking her relationship higher and taking her man higher. Men, in my experience, really, really, really want and deeply desire to show up for a woman in the way that we need them to.
Yes.
But because we're out of touch with our true desires, and we can't really communicate them because we're so mired in frustration, unprocessed anger, because it's never been legal for a woman to express and process her emotions. And so that's what we do with a woman, so that she can then communicate clearly her desires. And then a man comes on board, like jumps on board, because nothing gives a man more pleasure than giving pleasure to his woman. Nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like deeply satisfying a woman. And men also have been traumatized in many different ways, and also teaching these tools to men, helping them feel safe in their bodies, in their expression. And patriarchy has given us all a very narrow range of what's allowed as an emotional expression.
Yeah. Certainly it seems like it has damaged men, in different ways, but to the same degree that it's damaged women. I mean, this was a system that doesn't help anybody.
No, nobody. And bringing relationship to the next level is all a part of my big passion, my big vision. I call this the game of how good can it get, versus the game of suffering, how much can I bear, that we've all been taught by this system. So getting men on board is actually easier than we think. We just need to shift ourselves and lead with pleasure. So we start with stepping into leadership in our own lives, and then in our relationships and with our teams, if we're in leadership positions in the world. And so the domino effect, I'm smiling as I'm talking about, as I see it with my clients every day, and something that they thought was an impossible situation. Oh, my husband will never do it. And then we're surprised every time. I'm surprised too, because I don't take that for granted, but it's easier than we think.
Yeah. So it's not like when we're struggling like this, it's not that we're just with the wrong man.
Yes.
Our partner is somehow
correct.
The face of patriarchy. This is a systemic problem that
exactly.
we're trying to heal. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. Although my marriage did not survive, but I didn't have my awareness back then, and nobody around me did. In therapy, we're talking about, the stuff that it didn't involve this aspect of healing.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm calling it the missing link. And my big passion is helping the relationship that is there and has strong bones. And there's nothing inherently wrong in the setup. It's not an abusive relationship. It's not a damaging relationship. To get as high, elevate as, go as ecstatic as it has in it to go. And yeah, it gives me great pleasure.
Yeah. Wonderful. Have we covered the process? Anything I missed asking you?
You've asked great questions. Thank you. Yeah, that's the process. And those who are feeling it right now can learn more.
Please tell a little bit about, where to find you and how people would start this journey.
Thank you, Jessa. The easiest place to start is psdandme.com. That's P for patriarchy, S for stress, D for disorder, and me.com. And that's where you'll be able to download my entire 5-step system that I briefly shared with you.
Yeah,
but the download comes with exercises, practices, contemplation points. And there's also a link to schedule a consult with me. If you want to take this conversation further, you want to explore having the support for you or for you and your partner both, we can hop on a phone for 15 minutes and I will give you as much as I can about my insight into your situation, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. But psdandme.com is a great place to start. It also has a link there to my podcast, or you can find it on your favorite podcast app, Her Success Radio. And there we have conversations with women leaders in different areas about how it manifests. And you can learn more and see what resonates with you.
Wonderful. I'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes too, so people they don't have to be taking this down while they're driving.
Right. Right.
Well, thank you. I think this has been it's a really important conversation, and it's really a whole new look at, I'm just sitting here thinking about clients and just about my own life, about, wow, how important a component this is.
Yeah, thank you so much for welcoming this conversation. And the time has come for us to find out that there's nothing wrong with us.
Right.
That is my closing.
There's nothing wrong, and there's so much more possible.
And there is so much more that we don't even know about. We don't know what we don't know, but I'm game to find out. I hope you are too.
I am too. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing this.
My pleasure, Jessica. Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.